Charles Humbard, and my highest rank was MN1. I joined delayed entry in November '76. I knew I wanted to go into service because I wanted to follow my two brothers. Brother John was in the Navy active, and Brother Frank was in the Marine Corps. From boot camp, joined boot camp 18 September '77. Went to boot camp in San Diego, and then after boot camp, I went to ABHA school in Lakehurst, New Jersey, and it was 8 weeks. Following that, I went to 2 weeks of firefighting school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. From Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, then I went on to the Ranger, and it was like April 1978, and that started my career on the Ranger. On the Ranger, I worked on the flight deck. Started out as a blue shirt, chalk and chain aircraft. I worked in Fly 1. After Fly 1, you kind of get advanced to a better job, and I was a tow tractor driver. I'd pull and spot the planes around, and I did that for quite a few months, and then became a yellow shirt, which they actually direct the planes, by hand signals and into spots. So, well, this is for the plane to come straight ahead, and if you wanted to turn left, you go like this, and this was a stop. But at night you had flashlights with yellow cones on them, and you did the same thing. It was pretty dangerous on the flight deck at night. The green shirts, they're ABEs. There's the arresting gear and the catapults. The ABFs, they wear a purple shirt that's fuels, and the yellow shirts are ABHs, and that's the rate I was. Actual securing the planes, the towing the planes, and actual, the handling of the planes or whatever. So we're kind of like the bosses up there, not like the air boss up in the tower, but we kind of controlled, the flight deck. If somebody was doing something wrong, we would be the ones over there telling them to stop doing that or watch what they're doing, So I know when I was first on the flight deck, talking about doing dumb stuff, when the planes would come up on the bow and turn around to get away from the exhaust, I was jumping in the forward nets, and they're really big squares and stuff, and I was jumping down into the nets, and my Fly 1 boss couldn't see me, so I did that a couple times, and when I did come back up and he had time, he come up and shook me by the collar and said some colorful words, and I kind of learned my lesson that I'm supposed to drop down and grab a pad eye and turn your head and wait for the exhaust to go by, and not jump in the front nets where they can't see you. Because they don't know if you're blown overboard or anything. They look up there, you're supposed to be there, and then you're, okay, you're not there. So we had E2 E2 planes. It has the big radar on top. It's a Navy's way to keep track of everything. They would go up, and it was a prop plane. It was really neat because it could back itself up. It could reverse the blades, and it could back itself into a spot. You didn't have to hook up to that one and put it in spot. So it was really neat. I remember one time during night operations, I pulled fueler, a guy that checks the fuel in each plane, and he was heading straight toward the propellers, and he was about 3 to 4 feet away. And I grabbed him and pulled him away from the props. And as soon as I did, he realized what he was doing, and he thanked me for not letting him walk into the propellers. So at night with the propellers, it's like a kind of a mesero. You kind of get hypnotized or whatever, seeing the planes going around and the lights or whatever. So yeah, it was just something that happens. People get complacent on the flight deck, so I pulled people out in front of jet intakes, and it's very dangerous. So life expectancy is like 1 second when you're up there. It's just so dangerous. Some of the aircraft accidents that I saw, we had a F4 during heavy weather, really rough seas. It went into the catwalk and in the aft port side, and it was damaged so bad that the Tilly had to come pick it up and put it over the side because the bottom fuselage was all damaged and stuff, beyond repair. One other time during day operations, an F-14 was going to take off, and supposedly it didn't get hooked up right with the bar that pulls it or whatever, and the plane went down below the bow. The pilots ejected, and they'd hit the afterburners, and the F-14 went straight up, and when it came back down, it was like 30 yards from port side of the ship, and luckily it didn't hit the flight deck, or it would have been just a real bad disaster. So and there's a lot of danger up there, and it's you really have to be aware. Yes, during flight ops, Eddie, he worked in Flight 3 as he chalked and chained aircraft, and during flight operations, we had an A7 that he had just unchalked, and he got the idea to take he was on the port side, he was going to take the chalk, put it on the deck, and slide and go underneath the A7 to get to the other side where it wasn't so much exhaust and stuff coming toward him. And when he raised up, he hit his head on the bomb, one of the bomb racks, and fell down in front of the wheel. And the plane director couldn't see on that side, so when he started directing the plane, he got ran over, and he was in very bad shape. His parents came from the States. They took him into Subic to the hospital where his parents could see him before he passed away. But just a remembrance that he was a real nice guy and a nice shipmate, and it was a loss, that he passed away and got hurt. So, yeah, when we flew out to sea, it was 18-hour days, not a lot of time for sleep. I remember one time we flew for 18 days straight, and we ate box lunches that they brought up on deck for us for 18 days, and everybody started getting sick of eating the box lunches for that long. But it's a real privilege to work on the flight deck and to serve there. You could see the world. There was shipmates down below decks that couldn't see the ocean and the moon and the stars at night. Waiting for the planes to come in was just amazing. Sometimes it'd be 10 to 15 minutes before planes would stagger back in. So you had a lot of time at night to enjoy the ocean and everything. So we had we called it a shack or whatever. In between flights or whatever, sometimes you go in there and rest or whatever. But yeah, you got used to the 18-hour days, and even though you were tired at the end, to sleep and then back to doing it again, it was hard, but you kind of get used to that work habit. So work and sleep, that was what you were out there to do. So during flight ops, you didn't go down and eat regular meals. When I was a tow tractor driver, the boss would send one person down. Well, we wore these kind of solid green camo pants with a lot of pockets in them, And one guy would go down and get as many hamburgers as he could, and yeah, sandwiches stuffed everywhere, and he'd tell you to be down and back in 15 minutes, and any minute too. So you run down, you got in line, you got stuffed as many hamburgers in your pockets, and then came back up, you know. And then people would go, "What's he doing?" You know, with all those hamburgers in his pocket, you know. But that's what you had to do. We didn't stop for lunch. We kept going. I was on the USS Ranger from 1978 to 1980. A lot can happen in 2 years on a ship. Probably 5,000 to 6,000 with the aircrew on it and everything. We had different type of aircraft. We had F-14. We had 2 types of A-6 aircraft. We had the E-2, the radar reconnaissance planes. We had Wells, AH, and we had a cod, of course. It brought the mail aboard and took people off and on the ship. So the F-4 was still a mighty plane. They used it a lot in Vietnam, and it still held its own. I got on the Ranger about April 1978 because I had to finish schools, and then I cross-rated from ABH to mineman, and since there wasn't any mineman ratings on the aircraft carrier, I got off in 1980, probably March or April, and then went to my first duty station as a mineman. I was assigned to Det 1 in Long Beach, California, and it was a non-service shop, what they call. We did refurbishments on mines that aircraft would plant for practice into minefields. So I kind of went from aircraft to preparing mine shapes for aircraft. They have parachutes on them, and for practice they plant the mines, making sure they got them in the right spot. They're underwater mines, so there's minefields that the pilots would put in position, so they know if they ever actually had to before it came to put mines to prevent ships from, because they're to keep ships out of certain areas. There are Mark 6s that we sold to certain countries in the past that they still use the Mark 6. Most of it was in stateside. I went to Sicily twice. The first time I went was a 2-year billet, and it was in security at Naval Air Station Sigonella, Sicily, and I worked security. And then I came back to Charleston for 3 years, and then went back to Sicily and worked in the mine in the mine shop. I spent 18 years as a mineman, and it's a great career. I've served a couple of times with my brother John, but it's a big difference between shipboard life and shore duty, which I like because I got to spend time with my family, and that's well worth it too. So it seems like you're lost for a little bit when you get out of the Navy, trying to find a job, because a lot of your Navy training doesn't correlate over to the civilian world. But it took a few months, and I got a good job, and then spent most of I reside in Charleston, South Carolina. My kids were in school, so instead of moving them again, like every 3 years when you're in the Navy, we stayed there. So.
Proud of your Navy service?
Oh, very, very proud. I'd do it again. I might do a couple things a little different, but I'd definitely join again, and and, you know, support my country.